Hello everyone, I'm Adrifting, and I'm here to talk about Cthulhu Gonfalon, or how I like to pronounce it, Cthulhu Gonfalon. And Cthulhu Gonfalon is a very unique web novel because its protagonist is a god or a deity. So he's in a very different position than most of your regular main characters or protagonists. And the story is just very unique because it's so different from anything else you've read. This is one of the first divine or deity like main characters I've read. And, I thought I'd be doing some more entertainment ones like Superstars of Tomorrow, I Really Am a Superstar, or some unique ones like The Great Storyteller starring Hunter. But this one just stuck out to me on its uniqueness and just how much I could talk about, right? Release That Witch and whatnot, Magical Industrial Empire. But this is very similar to stuff like World of Deities and Sword of Daybreak. But as I said, this is the first of the genre. I read this right after Mages. So deity level web novels deal with the problem of omniscience, right, and all that power that comes with it. So it's very different from your regular standard protagonist or main character, just because his powers are different, and the issues he has to deal with is different. This is your classic sort of isekai web novel, but with a unique twist to it, just because of the character, the position that he's in, and the problems that he has to deal with within this world and this isekai that we really build up. So yeah, I may go into a quick tangent about omniscience and the standard levels of omniscience, or I may not, depending on how talkative I tend to be. Also, I kind of want the video not to be too long, so that might be a separate video in and of itself. Um, but yeah, Cthulhu Gonfalon is definitely special um, because of the level of power it has, and it's definitely a more niche web novel because it goes through a unique genre rather than like urban life omniscience, which is like system based, or like God amongst men or mortals, right? You see that with Am I a God or Spare Me Great Lord. Um, I may go over a quick overcap of omniscience. So there's a couple of different types. The Wuxia syndrome or Xianxia, right, is the different worlds. So obviously longevity is the name of the game. That's a sort of divinity in and of itself. The special ability or quirk, that's protagonist syndrome, like superpowers basically, supercharged bloodline. As I said, that's mostly Wuxia, or Isekai syndrome, where you're given a special ability from God. That's the classic Japanese protagonist template. Then you have the foreknowledge omniscience, which is rebirth or returnee sort of thing. Anything with skill panels or system is a slightly higher level of omniscience because you can see the data of other people, such as dice, the game, the gamer, world after the fall. Anything with a third person perspective is a slightly higher level of omniscience because you have third person awareness, right? Stuff like the Stanley Parable, Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint. Above that, you have gamer syndrome, where you're in a VR MMORPG, or you have a game where you have lives, but you can respawn, right? That's pretty high level omniscience because you can change stuff. Then you have like the author administrator level powers, so where you can interfere with the story or characters. Um, that is pretty high level of omniscience. You're kind of like shaping the story almost to a point of invulnerability. As I said, special abilities carry on. Anything with infinite flow, like ultimate evolution, where you're going through multiple worlds and you gain powers, that's a sort of omniscience that's classified under the third person perspective one. Other but other system-based web novels would be A Valiant Life or Monk Renounced Asceticism, and then you get to stuff like The Administrator. Um, Cthulhu Gonfalon is a DD-based ones. So DD web novels have different levels as well. Usually there's like, it goes through the D&D levels of good and evil, neutrality and whatnot, chaotic versus order, right? So that 9 level square. Um, there's good gods, evil gods, they're based on alignment and character, chaotic versus order. Um, and the level of deities is usually based on omniscience, based on either concepts or nature, right? You either derive your power from the world, right? Like the environment, how it's built, right? Whether it's just nature in and of itself, right? Like plants or whatnot. So the more plants there are, or the more people that you have, the more power you gain. So that's the power of belief or spiritualness, right? And then there's the conceptual idea, right? The sun god, the moon god, those are concepts, right? Something like, the god of math, the god of wisdom, in Greek mythology or Roman mythology, Hephaestus or Vulcan, right? The Roman god Vulcan, or the Greek god Hephaestus, they're both the god of craftsman, which then translates to technology, right? So that's a sort of concept, right? Craftsman is that idea. But then you have believers, right? Supporters, right? Basically, believers are people who believe in your concept or your deity. And then, especially in this world of divinity, right, we go to a more Western idea of divinity, which is gods have their own personality and they're influenced by their believers, right? So because, humans have human desires, gods tend to have human traits, or they'll take on the traits or personalities of the people who believe in them, whether it's they're fanatical, right, or scheming or evil, right? So evil gods like Loki will take on a more scheming or sinister undertone, more treacherous based on their believers, whereas more pious believers or good-natured believers will tend to reflect on their gods, right? So there's the god of law and order. There are the supposedly good or light gods and the evil gods, right? Who support various races, right? Orcs versus humans, dragons, and it's a very Western fantasy world in Cthulhu Gonfalon. So I've given a very long and tedious background when I really should have given the main character, but I really enjoy getting into the nitty gritty of things before I get into the story itself. So that was the quick divinity tangent. Now we're going to go on to the story. So I'll read the summary real quick, or I'll give a quick summary real quick. So our main character, I don't really know how his Chinese name is pronounced. I could learn it, but I'm too lazy to. Is Sui Xiong. I'm going to assume, and he is isekai, right? He is from Earth, but he gets isekai to a Western magical fantasy world, right? And he is not human. He's a jellyfish. So this is one of my first non-human protagonists. Not Kuma Kuma Bear was much more um still human based, but this is like the first, animal like non like bipedal protagonist, not like a beastman or whatnot. Like so he's like a jellyfish, right? And he's kind of this immortal god, this amorphous blob, something akin to like Kirby, Rimuru, Tempest, right? Rimuru slime, a slime reincarnated in another world. But he is this god with divine, like, oh, I forgot to go over divine like power. That's a sort of omniscience, but that's derived from God rather than being your own, right? God's chosen. Um, but he is this god, right? And he's kind of this natural god. He's not an idea born from a race or a people or idea. He is just a god in being, right? A divinity. He's divine because he has divine power, and he can get stronger by devouring other divinities and whatnot and so forth. But he's just this natural human that becomes a god, but with human ideas. And so this is where the main conflict comes in, because he's thrust into this fantasy medieval-like world where the culture is completely different. Some would say not as progressed on the tech tree, but it's just a different world, right? So some would say more primitive or whatnot, but I don't want to go label barbarism or primitivism or whatnot. But he is with his what a lot of web novels like to say more modern values, or just like earth-like values, is just very different from his concept of morality that they practice on this isekai world. And so he slowly starts to try to emulate or become more human, right? Because he's a god. But even gods have their own issues, right? They have human personalities, they can split up, divinity can break apart. Um, and right, you can lose you like what is it? Immortality comes with its own sense of madness when you lose a sense of time. Indigo Sharp, author on Royal Road, depicted that very well with the idea of concept of time and aeons. All gods become mad over time. Unless like there's some sort of mechanism that allows them to die, right? Because gods are immortal, they can't die supposedly. But so Cthulhu, Gonfalon, or Suishung, right? He is this god, and then he slowly picks up followers, right? Believers, right? He doesn't necessarily like he's similar to the protagonist in A Sneeze Destroy Magical Civilizations, where he doesn't really want believers because believers, pin him down. They pin their beliefs, their hopes on him, and then they can communicate with him with wishes through pastors, priests, and whatnot. And there's this whole political conflict and world building of the different godhoods, the different kingdoms, the different religious conflicts, based on this vying for power, right? More power allows you to protect more and gain more believers and so on and so forth, and this vicious cycle of foreign gods versus the temple of gods, and like the hierarchy of how gods work, right, in this new world, and the various personalities that he encounters. And so our main character, is considered a more naive character because he's not used to this world. Like, I think it was in the manga Bakido, which is like he has no attachments to this world, so he's like unbelayed. He's not connected because he has no personal connections. But slowly, trying to stay human or to keep some sort of human aspect to him, he gains personal relationships with the people of the world. He gains followers and chosen ones that believe in him, and he, one would say, is weighed down by these connections, or they strengthen him depending on how you would interpret this naive main character. And it's this level of innocence that the author really explores, as this main character or this protagonist is thrust into this deity like figure. And so throughout the web novel we see less of Cthulhu Gonaflon's struggle, right? Sui Xiong, his name is called Cthulhu Gonaflon. And we see more of his follower struggles and how he saves them or helps them, right? We kind of get a one punch man scenario where he's kind of like a deus ex machina. He just comes in at the last moment, but he has his own fights in the background. But the main characters are always the characters of the world, similar but also slightly different to World of Deities, and even to a certain extent Sword of Daybreak. And Cthulhu Gonfalon is so special because it's just so unique, right? Compared to, like, Absolute Choice or Counterfeit Hero, with the direction that our main character takes, which is very detached and it's very focused on environment and world building. And our god, as naive as he may be, encounters his own struggles and his own world, to do what he thinks is right. And it's just kind of endearing to see the struggles that he goes through and the people that he meets, and it's just a really cool adventure. I'm not going to say too much on the ending because I don't remember too much about it. There's a lot of cool epic struggles, a lot of cool religious struggles, moral struggles, and interesting characters throughout that just make it a really good story. As I said, this is very niche. It's definitely more toward a specific reader. So, you know, if you're 100 chapters in and you feel like this web novel is not for you, then it's okay to put it down. But for me, this is one that I enjoyed immensely just because it was so different from everything else. And that's really all I have to say about Cthulhu Gonaflon. So we'll stop here.